Good evening. I'm excited to share what God's doing in Romania and Ukraine tonight. My goal for tonight is to hopefully explain what we were doing in Romania, the kind of work we were doing, where we were, that kind of thing. And I-58, I'll be talking about who we were working with in just a minute. And I-58's involvement in Romania is new since the war in Ukraine began. We were also working with another mission that is also fairly new, based out of Romania. So I hope to kind of give you a background to help you understand who we were working with. And I also want to bring awareness to what is going on in Ukraine, how God is at work, and how we can be involved. And I want God to receive all the honor and glory for what is going on over there. He's doing great things, and it's really exciting. So a little bit of an overview. I'll be talking about who we were working with, where we were, what did we do, and as I talk, if you have questions or if something's unclear, just tell me, and I'll try to help you out with that. So for those of you who didn't know, I was serving in Romania from July, September, and October, the 3 months, working in Romania, providing humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Like I mentioned earlier, I was working with 2 different organizations while I was there. First was I-58. This is who I would have gone with to Greece as well earlier. So I was already familiar with them. And the other organization that we were working with was called Fight for Freedom. So first was I-58. This would be kind of like my sending organization, I guess you could say, the people that I went over with. I-58 is a nonprofit parachurch organization serving refugees in Greece and beyond. They are committed to equipping volunteers to provide relief and hope for displaced people groups. They work in Romania, Germany, and on the Greek islands of Lesbos and Samos, daily facilitating relief work, community centers, and hope for the refugees that we encounter. Like I said before, I-58 itself is not a new mission, but their involvement in Romania is new since the war started. So these are the people that I was living with, that I was working with most closely, was the I-58 team. And then as a team, we worked with Fight for Freedom. We took care of the food distribution side of Fight for Freedom's mission. Fight for Freedom is committed to standing with people whom society has overlooked as they fight to overcome poverty, ostracism, isolation, and past mistakes. We honor and seek to serve those unseen fighters. So a little bit more about Fight for Freedom. They started originally in 2019. They're based out of Suceava, Romania, which was where we were living. Originally, their focus was to reach homeless, ex-convicts, and people in need by showing them Christ's love and helping them to reintegrate into society, and that is still their goal and their purpose, but since the war started, they have been heavily involved in humanitarian aid for Ukraine now, but that's still their goal, is to help those people. So they have a program to help ex-convicts reintegrate into society. A lot of the founders of Fight for Freedom actually were also spent prison time, and so their stories are just amazing. God's redemption in their lives is so clear to see and really exciting. They also have 2 orphanages in Romania. Most of the children in the first orphanage are children from the town of Odessa, Ukraine, that have been abandoned by their families. Those are young children, anywhere from 1 to 4 maybe. And then there's another orphanage that houses children who do still have families, but they live in the red zone or like the front lines. And so their families sent them to Romania in hopes of giving them a little bit more safety than they have in Ukraine. So their stories are heartbreaking, and they are just too young to have the stories that they have. So it was a blessing to be able to see them and interact with them a little bit. We didn't do a lot of that. Fight for Freedom is always growing and dreaming and is involved in many other ministries as well, but I-58 took care of the food distribution, like I said, and so that's the part of Fight for Freedom that I'm going to be talking about. So the team structure, there are 4 long-termers. There are 4 long-termers that are there all the time, 2 guys and 2 girls, and then they have short-termers cycling through the team. So the team is constantly changing every about 3 months. They get new teams in because of the European, Americans can only be there for 3 months, 90 days on a visa that we use. So short-termers are cycling through all the time, and then they have 4 steady long-termers. So these are the people that I was working with most closely. So where were we? I mentioned Suceava earlier. I don't know how well that shows, but we were up in the northern part of Romania. And then zooming in a little bit, this is Suceava. Another way to describe it is like maybe like a county, like Lebanon County, Lancaster County, Suceava County, that's where we're living. And then this is the city of Suceava. We lived about 15 minutes outside of that in a small town or a village called Lisara. And then we had a half-hour drive to work every day in Varesht. And this is where the warehouse was and the Fight for Freedom Center. So that gives you a little bit about where we were in Romania. And then on the days that we took food bags into Ukraine, we had 3 different cities that we were going into. The first one was Chernivtsi, the second one was Kamenets-Podilsky, and the third one was Ivano-Frankivsk. And then just to give you a little bit of an idea, Odessa is where Val and Vika's family came from. So we were mostly in the east or the western part of Ukraine, and Odessa is down here in the southern part. Just to give you a little bit of a visual for where they came from. So the center, this is the Fight for Freedom Center, the headquarters. This is where the office is and where all the work goes down. This is also the location of the first orphanage where those young children that have been abandoned, this is where they live. And then back this long lane toward where I was standing to take the picture is where the warehouse is. So it's back behind the center. We were renting the warehouse from a farmer whose farm was behind the center. So this is where we were spending most of our days. We worked at the warehouse from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4 o'clock, and that changed every day, but that was the hours that we had. The team is actually in the process of moving warehouses from this location to another location a minute or two down the road. We had started doing a little bit of it while we were still there, but they are still working on that. It's a much nicer location. It has multiple different buildings, and so it's just a bigger and much more ideal location for us. And it was clear to see God in the process while looking for that warehouse. He provided the exact amount of money that they needed and was able to just a lot more room than we had until that point. And so, yeah, just seeing God's hand in getting a new warehouse was exciting. But this is where I spent most of my time. So this is the inside of the warehouse when we first got there. Pallets, boxes everywhere, stacked on top of each other. There wasn't a lot of organization, but we figured out where everything was. But near to the end of our time, we were able to get shelving, and it felt like an actual warehouse, which was very exciting, and it felt really good to have shelving. So you'll see down the 2 sides and then in the middle shelving, and so we were able to get things off the ground and find out where everything was a little better. These are the box trucks that we took into Ukraine. They spent many, many, many hours on the road and served us well. So I kind of next want to talk about the process from start to finish, so making a bag until it gets to Ukraine. Basically, the first part of the process, it really all begins with donations. Most of the food that we were packaging came from donations. There was 2 places that we got a lot of our food. Teen Challenge has a location in Romania, and so we got a lot of our food from them. And then also another organization called Convoy of Hope provided us with a lot of food as well, and we relied heavily on their donations. So what's inside the bags? I think Drew might have actually mentioned some of this once when he was giving an update, but this is what some bags looked like. They didn't vary a lot from bag to bag, but sometimes they would have an extra pack of rice in a bag or something like that. But generally, a bag would have a rice meal packet, often 2. I don't know if you can see. Okay, you can't see my mouse. But often 2 rice packages were in each bag. Sometimes that varied a little more or a little less, depending on where we were going. The bag would always have meat, as much meat as we could spare. It was so usually 2 cans of meat. Nothing fantastic, but it did what we could. And then we would also usually have pasta or noodles if we had them, a canned vegetable of some sort, maybe tomatoes, peas, beans, whatever we had on hand. And then usually a small sweet treat like a biscuit, or for a while we had a huge Cliff Bar shipment that we were able to use, and they really enjoyed those. We went through a lot of food each week, typically about 13 pallets of meat, 7 pallets of beans, 6 pallets of pasta, and 5 to 10 pallets of biscuits, and that's not including the rice that we put in the bags as well. So it was a lot of food being cycled through the warehouse. The process for packing, this is the line. I didn't have a very good picture of it, so hopefully I can kind of explain to you what we were doing, but you'll see the red table at the very end there is where you start. You get a bag and open it up, and then you walk down the line and put in whatever is in that bag for the day. So maybe 2 biscuits, 2 meat, a can of vegetables, whatever it is. And then at the other end, there's another red table like that. Tie your bag, let it on the table, and then you just keep going around and around in a circle all day long. And once that table of tied bags is full, we had a clicker at the end. You'd put the bags in, click how many you put in, so you always knew how many was in the crate. And then usually once the crate, you can see that she's pulling the crate there, usually once it had about 150 bags in, we'd swap it out for an empty crate. And that's how the bag process went. And then from the crates, they went into the truck. It was very important that we knew what was in each bag and what was in each truck for the paperwork that had to be done. This paperwork had to be showed at the Ukrainian border, Romanian and Ukrainian border, to get into Ukraine. So it was very important that we knew what was in each truck. The trucks could handle somewhere around 2,500 kilos of weight, so we could usually get anywhere from 700 to 1,000 bags in a truck. It depended on the weight of the bag. If we were doing a bigger bag, less bags in the truck. Most of the moving was all by hand into the truck. We did have a forklift, which was a blessing, but yeah, a lot of it was done by hand. And then once the bags were loaded in the truck, we were almost ready for the distributions. Before I start talking about the distributions, I want to talk a little bit about the daily warehouse life. What else happened at the warehouse besides packing bags? We ate lunch at the center every day. The staff on Ukrainian or Romanian staff, women would cook for us as well as the orphanage. This is a picture of the meat situation. Sometimes the weight of the meat would open up cans, and then those cans would sit there and rot and would smell very, very bad. So this was reality some days. Those were not fun. If we got our bags done in time, got our bags done early for that week, we could sometimes help out in other ways that needed to be helped out around the center. So they were remodeling the bottom half of the orphanage, and so we got into some painting and some other construction kind of work like that, cleaning, and then started moving the warehouse as well. And then there was always children around. This was an orphanage. We didn't interact a lot with them, but they were always around. So we got to say hi and, see them there. So now I want to talk a little bit about the distribution days and what those looked like. So before we really were ready to hit the road, there was a checklist we had to go over every time. So do the trucks all have fuel? Is the registration where it belonged? Registration was very important. One day we decided that we should have a copy of the registration in the trucks instead of the actual registration so that we don't lose it, and they did not like that. They left us through, but we had the real registration from then on. Then we had to check if there were vests in the truck. We wore a vest for every distribution, and then check if our paperwork was ready and signed and in the trucks. At that point, we were ready to get on the road. Each evening before distro days, we would, the trucks that were going into Ukraine the next day would come home with us. That's what this picture is showing. So oftentimes, every available parking spot at our house was full and then some, which was stress to the neighbors. So we had to try to figure that out. But there was a lot of driving time involved. I mentioned the border before. The border looked like you would come, it was about 45 minutes from where we lived, and you would get to the border on the Romanian side. You would get through that side, show your paperwork, show your passports, get your stamp, and then you were into the kind of the middle zone before you got to the Ukrainian side. Would have to wait there often, and then at the Ukrainian side, show your paperwork again, show your passports. They would often look into the back of the truck to make sure that we had what our paperwork said, and then we would be ready to go. It was super unpredictable to know how long it was going to take at the Ukrainian border, or at the border. Often we would plan for an hour, but it wasn't uncommon to be at the border for longer than that, or on a good day, maybe a little less than that. So yes, this is in the middle between the borders. Welcome to Ukraine. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but so there was a lot of driving time. And sometimes it got a little long, but we made it. So I'm now going to talk about the first distribution. This was the Friday distribution, so this is where we went every Friday, and that was Chernivtsi. We brought 2,000 bags to this location, and near to the end of my time, we were upping that amount of bags because there was a big need for it there. So I will try to explain how we did lines here, but you'll see this was a location that we had a lot of problems with, mainly because the location that we had was just too small. And so you have all these people in a small contained area, and it was a problem. And then you also had refugees that needed this food, but Turnipseed also had a lot of locals that needed the food as well. And there was tension between that and knowing, like, we need to give to the bags to the refugees first, but then these people also need them. Trying to figure that out was difficult. So how we did lines here, we parked the trucks in a row, and then the people would circle around the back and go in between those first two trucks. That was the normal line. And then you'll notice on this side, they're circling in between the second two trucks. That's the line for the mothers and the children and the elderly people. So they didn't have to wait in line quite so long. That was typically a shorter line. And then they would get their bag at the end of the truck and take it out the way they came in. So that was Turnipseed. The lines were always very long. You'll notice here that if you look closely, there's some people playing the accordion and singing. Oftentimes distribution started with preaching or singing. We couldn't understand any of that because it was in Ukrainian. Most people did not speak English. This was a friend that I met that did speak English, and I am very blessed to still be able to have contact with her. Her husband is living in Kyiv, and they haven't been together. He is not in a safe place, but she left to get safety for her daughter, Anne. The second distribution was the one that we went to on Wednesdays. This was Kamieniec-Podolski. This distribution was a lot calmer than Turnipseed. We took 1,500 bags to this location every week. The process had been started well, and so everyone knew what they were doing, and there was ample place for lines to form, and so it was a lot easier to keep order and keep peace at this distribution. They had a good system going. So on this side, again, mothers and children line, and then on this side, just the normal line. They would come up and they would get their bags. So before they got their bag, we would have to check their passport to make sure that they really were from an area that was unsafe, so to prove kind of that they were refugees. And then they would get their bag. And this was the people that we worked with. You'll see the woman next to me in the blue dress was our contact person for this location, and we had a good relationship with these people in this location, and so it was always a good day when we got to go there. After the distribution on Wednesdays in Kamieniec-Podolski, we would go about 35-40 minutes further into Ukraine to a place called Dunayevsky. There was not a distribution here. We were simply dropping off 500 bags. So we would bring 2,000 bags into Ukraine, distribute 1,500 in Kamieniec-Podolski, and then take the rest into Dunayevsky and unload it at a church. And they took care of distributing those then. Some of them actually went up into the front lines for soldiers, and other people that just needed them. The church took care of that. And then the other distribution that we did was on Tuesdays. This was a newer one. We had just started near to the end of my time, and that was called Ivano-Frankivsk. So here we had started a ticket system. So they would come and they would show their documents, and it depended on how many people were in their family. So if they had 2 people in their family, we would give them a yellow ticket. That meant they get 1 bag. They would take that ticket down to the trucks, give it to the people down there, and the yellow told them that, okay, you get 1 bag. And if they had more people in their family, I don't remember what all the numbers were, but if they had more people, they would get a green ticket, and that told them they get 2 bags. A blue ticket, I think, was 3 bags, and a red ticket was 4 bags. And so we were able to give by family size to the people in Ivano-Frankivsk, but not all of the locations where we were able to do that. So it was nice that we could give extra to the people that needed them in this location. So this is where they came down, gave their ticket to the people at the truck, and then got their bag and headed out. Distro days were always a highlight for me because that was the time that we got to interact with people at the warehouse. Obviously, we're just packing bags. We're not interacting with refugees very often. So it was always a highlight for me to be able to interact with them and form relationships with those people that were just so desperate. The lady on the end there is Oksana, and she was our point person for this distribution. So she was also a refugee, and she was able to she just wanted to help her people, so she helped us coordinate this distribution in Ivano-Frankivsk. We did one longer trip. People often ask me, like, were we in danger while we were there? And so the simple answer is no. Our normal trips to Chernivtsi, Kamianets-Podilsky, and Ivano-Frankivsk, we didn't see effects of war in those cities. These are just cities that people were escaping to from dangerous areas. And so most of the time we weren't actually seeing that much war destruction. It was just we were seeing the people that had come from that place. But we did do one longer trip into Ukraine one weekend. And this trip was not a weekly trip like other trips. And our goal for this one was to be able to take more aid to the more vulnerable people closer to the front lines. The town we went to had been occupied by Russian forces and was recently liberated, so the people were in great need. The trip was extremely eye-opening for me. Being able to see the realities of war up close was hard, but also really good. So kind of to show you where we were here, this is Kyiv, the capital, and then the city that we were doing most of our distributing in was Chernihiv. So that's up near the Russian border, a lot closer. So we were into Ukraine a lot further on this one. We had a large team that we were working with. So this was I-58 and Fight for Freedom together had gone on this one. So there was a lot of people along. And we also met up in Ukraine with another organization called Bread of Life, and they were going with us. They spoke Ukrainian, and so they were super helpful with finding locations and translating and everything like that. We had a 7-truck convoy plus a few other random cars that were traveling with us. It was about a 12-hour drive from beginning to end, not including the many food and gas stops along the way when you're traveling with this many people. There's a lot of patience involved, but it was nice to break up the time as well, stopping all the time. We left early Thursday morning, one Thursday morning, drove all day, and made it to our first hotel in Kyiv late Thursday night. We got a few hours of much-needed sleep before getting ready to hit the road around 5:30 the next morning. We had a friend who lived in Kyiv, and we visited them before heading to our distribution sites. Her and her husband wanted to give us a little tour of their destroyed city, so that's where a lot of these pictures are coming from. So we drove by a lot of things like this. And they were just really wanted to show us and tell us about like their city and what it used to be like, and this is reality for people. You'll notice on this one, something that was hard for me to wrap my mind around is if you look closely, the front 2 apartment buildings are not livable, but then right behind it, those are still livable and have people living in them. And so it was just hard to like imagine having your neighbor's house completely destroyed, but you're still living in the house right next to it. Our friend Oksana, when we went to visit them, she had her house where she was living, and then the house right beside her was not livable. And it was just hard to fathom life like that. So a lot of these, again, are destroyed. Fight for Freedom had hired or gotten a videographer along on this trip, so a lot of these pictures are drone photos. Oksana took us to this bridge that had actually been destroyed by Ukrainian forces because this is one of the main ways for Russian forces to get into Ukraine. They had destroyed it themselves in hopes of keeping people out. If you look closely, you'll see that white van on the end there that is in the water. During the night one evening, a volunteer from another organization, I don't even know what organization it was driving and lost his life there because he did not know the bridge had been destroyed. So just drove off the end. This bridge had been a shelter for a lot of refugees. They hid under the bridge and to find safety. You see this kind of thing along the road all the time. Landmines were very real there. So then the distros that we were doing, after they took us around their city a bit, we headed to several different locations in Chernihiv, in the city there. Most of them were 5, 10, 15 minutes apart, not far apart at all, but they were often at locations with parks, with lots of trees to keep from being noticed. People were just too nervous to gather in large crowds to draw attention to themselves. So each distro distribution was small. So this was the first one. You'll see the one in the red hat is preaching. He is the founder of Fight for Freedom. His story is absolutely amazing. His name is George. He spent quite a few years in jail, and since then got out and is just doing amazing things, and God is working through him. So he preached at that distribution. He's preaching in Romanian. The man next to him is translating into Ukrainian. These people waiting in line at that first site that we were at, they would get their food at this truck, and then they would go over to Bread of Life's truck, and they would get a loaf of bread from that other organization that we were working with. We also were able to drop off some clothing boxes at this location that they were able to just to go through. They were thrilled. This is another one of the locations that we were at. You'll see a little bit more. This one has more trees around it. A park that we distributed in. It was a much smaller crowd. And then another location that we were at. These were some Christian girls that we met, and it was just challenging to me to see their resilience and their strength and their joy, even in this reality that was what was reality for them. And how often I can get so discontent with where I'm at in my privileged life, and they were just so happy, even though they were living a nightmare. The bags that we brought into Chernihiv this long trip were filled with more essentials in hopes of lasting a little bit longer for these people that needed it so badly. They had flour, cornmeal, sugar, salt, oil, rice, and a Bible we were able to put in there as well. We took the extra bags that we had left over to an insurance agency, which was only about 60 kilometers from the Russian border. It felt like we had come so close to the front lines, but with all the destruction that we saw, and yet this was normal, this was reality and life for these people. So then late Friday afternoon, we headed home again, drove for a while, stopped at night at another hotel, and then finished our trip on Saturday and got back around 6:30 on Saturday evening. Like I said, the trip was eye-opening and faith-building for me. God answered so many prayers during the trip by keeping us safe and allowing us the opportunity to provide a small bit of aid for these hurting people. It was also just so hard to know how to process everything that we had seen standing in front of these destroyed buildings, and this is life for these people, and just trying to decide what do I do with that? So on the trip home, I had begun just writing as a way of processing it. And so I'm going to read that now and hope to just giving you a little bit of a glimpse beyond pictures what the trip meant for us. Beautiful tree-lined highways, shining golden sunflower fields, blue skies filled with happy clouds, and vibrant wildflowers. These breathtaking scenes fly by our windows mile after mile, making it ever so easy to see the loving, kind Creator's hand behind it all. Then suddenly the scenery changes, breathtaking still, but now in a dreadful, heartbreaking way. Fields of yellow, wildflower glory, stately trees, and those happy clouds are replaced with demolished buildings, shattered windows, deserted homes, uprooted lives, and soldiers donned in uniform and grave faces. Where is that loving, kind Creator's hand now? I begin to watch the people now, the ones whose once normal, comfortable, safe places have been grossly ripped away from them. Some go to work attempting to hold on to what they once knew. Others go shopping, hands still with their latest purchases. Children now ride their bikes in front of destroyed buildings, hold their parents' hands as they walk down broken sidewalks, and play with their friends like they did before those dreaded missiles flew overhead. I realize that I'm watching these dear souls desperately attempt to create a new normal to replace their broken ones. How can such beauty and such tragedy coexist? Questions swirl in my mind one after the next. What does it feel like to live under the constant threat of war reaching your front door? How does it feel to drive through your neighborhood only to see one building after the next decorated with bullet holes, shattered windows, and blackened, crumbling walls? How does it feel to wait in desperate lines for a bag of food to get you through the next week? As much as my heart breaks for you, I can't understand the depth of your pain. I want to fix everything, to piece together your shattered reality, to make life safe again, but I can't. And what if I could? Then where would be the need for an omnipotent Savior? So no, I can't make things better for you, but I know the one who can, and oh, how I want you to know him too. My prayer for you is this: in the unstable, the chaotic, the confused, the scared, I pray you would find the shelter that is your Heavenly Father, that Jesus would become your constant, your peace, your courage, that you would see Jesus in our faces as we hand you the meager help that we can offer, and that you could come to understand your desperate need of him. And if I never see you again in this war-torn land, I pray that we meet again in heaven. Can you imagine worshiping Jesus together in a place that doesn't know war, pain, heartbreak, or suffering. But for now, I get to go home, back to a safer streets, a comfortable house, a normal. It's not fair. I'll add it to my growing list of questions with answers that refuse to reveal themselves this side of eternity. You've been through the unthinkable. You are brave, strong, resilient. I'm not going to forget you. You touched me, and I pray you allow the healer to touch you. And so it was just hard to know what to do with what we saw, but I'm also so grateful that I got to see that and see how God is working in Ukraine. Some scenery pictures. Ukraine, this is a mix between Ukraine and Romania. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. We went on a hike one weekend. This is on our drive to work. Just beautiful scenery, just on the way to work. Many beautiful sunsets. We didn't do a lot of touring because we spent plenty of hours on the road the way it was. But one weekend we went to a town that had like shops lining the village shops lining each side of the road, and then just beautiful scenery. This was outside of out the back door of our house. This was the view from the second orphanage that I talked about, the one that had the children that had been sent away for hopefully some safety. And so they did not have a lot of place to go around. They were actually kind of right there in the middle of the city, but this was their view. There was always someone selling flowers in Ukraine, and another early morning sunrise. And one of my favorite scenes when we first got there was sunflower fields everywhere, just fields of yellow. As far as you could see, it was gorgeous. And then a little bit before I close, some more about just daily life and what things looked like for us. This was our house. So the guy's side was on this side and the girls was on this side, so it was a duplex and we each had our own side. It was ideal living conditions, honestly. We were actually the first people to rent this, so it was a brand new house. We spent all of our free time usually on the guy's side. That's where we did all the cooking. That's where we had church. We would call into I-58 in Greece. That's where we did our church services. And just hung out in the evenings was usually at the guy's house. That was our living space. I mentioned before that we were at the warehouse from Monday to Friday, and then also distributions during the week, and then every Saturday and Sunday was our off days. So that was nice. Saturday evenings, we often went and played volleyball with some of the local Romanian youth there. Or we would go to the turf that was close to our house and play spike ball, or hang out at a coffee shop. We did all of our own cooking, and so one of my jobs was to come up with a food list for the week and then a shopping list and do that. And so that was often a big job to get all those groceries. So that's a little bit about my time there. I'm going to wrap it up here shortly, but just some prayer requests that you can think of as you think of Ukraine, that God would bring good from the evil and that he would draw the hurting to himself, that he could use this as a time of revival. Pray for the Fight for Freedom and the I-58 teams as they coordinate logistics for all these trips into Ukraine and to the different locations, and pray for safety as well for them as they go in there. Pray for peace and an end to the war. People often say this war looks like it's going to go on for a long time, but I truly believe that God can end it whenever he sees fit. I also plan to go back in the beginning of January, so I covet your prayers as I plan to go back for 3 more months, for January, February, and March. Is there any questions before I finish up? Thank you for your prayers while I was gone, and thank you for listening.